Hoala, thank you so much for joining us today.
Michael, thanks for having me. It's a privilege to be on this Zoom with you folks. I never assume people want to hear me talk.
Well, we do. So, as I kind of get kicked off here, the first question, I mean, I think a lot of our community knows who you are. You've been around for our Aloha Galas. You've been with, the HCCNC for a few years. But maybe to get started, could you just share your story from the early days? Growing up on the islands, I think Liliha Valley, and then ending up at Portland State. What was that like growing up in Hawaii and then obviously transitioning to the mainland?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in town. I'm a townie. My parents divorced when I was two, and they remain good friends even to today. So kind of split time between the two homes growing up. Grew up in Kapahulu as a kid. I went to Hokulani, then I went to Washington, and then McKinley. Moved to Liliha in about 8th grade, so that's kind of my roots there. Rabid McKinley fan. I mean, don't even get me started on that one. I mean, just I can talk at great lengths about my high school. So lots of pride there, and I think it revolves around, in Hawaii we have a caste system that's different from the mainland, right? The caste system in Hawaii is what high school you went. And by and large, if you run the numbers, unfortunately, it kind of cues towards some sense of accuracy, at least when it comes to business or financial outcomes. So makes me even more proud to be from a high school that statistically does not trend towards financial or business success, let alone being Native Hawaiian as well. So that's kind of where the pride in McKinley High School comes from. Yeah.
Well,
and then, oh, sorry. Yeah,
no,
I was rambling there.
no,
So I played a lot of baseball. My dream at the time was to A, be in the McKinley Hall of Honor, and B, play college baseball. So I played 1 year at Menlo College. We were terrible, but at least I got to play. And then I transferred to Portland State my sophomore year and finished up there.
So that was gonna be actually one of my questions is, like growing up on the atlas. So my plan was to be a construction worker. That was like my my thing growing up. I didn't get that good grades. I did better after a little bit of time, but did you ever think that like were you planning to go mainland and that at this point? Like, I mean, I guess if you were planning to play college ball, were you planning to go mainland or was it, stay home and play or did you even have like a sense at that point?
Well, I knew I wasn't good enough to play for UH, so play baseball pretty much meant play mainland. So I played D3, and I was lucky enough to get a scholarship during college. It was through Kamehameha Schools. It was federal funds administered through KS. So I graduated college with very low debt and didn't forget what that did for me. And that scholarship program no longer exists. So that had some bearing on me as far as what we're doing now at Paubox. Yeah.
Yeah. And then at the one of the things that I wanted to hit on, which I think is so interesting to me, is that you're a tech and software entrepreneur, right? But you didn't study CS or engineering, right? You studied, I think, social sciences, right? And geography. Is that correct? Or
Yes. So pretty much. So I started out as a CS major at Portland State. And when I figured out it was going to take 7 years to graduate, I switched to something I liked, geography. But during my 1 year pursuing CS, I saw this job board in a computer science building, help wanted, and this ad was asking for this program that was almost identical to the homework we had the week before. And I thought, holy shit, this has to be fake. I better move on it. So I call the guy, and sure enough, it's not fake. And this guy's desperate because they needed it to run payroll. So I spent 1 hour of my time on it. I hooked in my buddy in Hawaii because he had a piece of software that turned it into an executable. And man, I met this guy the next week at a Safeway parking lot with a floppy disk. I charged him an arm and a leg. I think I charged him like $1,000 or something for an hour's of work. He was not happy about the price, but I had the product and I had it on time. And he gave me the check in the parking lot, and that was my first piece of software, my sophomore year in college. And I was just hooked, man. I was thinking, man, this is fun. So yeah, switched majors just to graduate. Kept working on computer stuff. Worked at the lab. Figured if I could break into systems, like somebody would pay me eventually to keep their system safe. So that's what I did. Wasn't that great. I got caught a couple times, so I was on a blacklist towards the end there. But did learn some about cybersecurity and all that good stuff. And then when I graduated Portland State, I had the opportunity to work at an email company in San Francisco, and to me, it was and it still is the cranium of the internet. And so I immediately hopped at that and started working at Critical Path in 1999.
Yeah, so that's so interesting that when you explain it as a cranium on the internet, because I think, people don't understand that email is protocol driven, right? It's the underlying rails of you have email, you have the various web protocols and so forth. You have, I won't go too much into Bitcoin and other stuff, but you have these like rails of the internet, and you're working on the core kind of infrastructure and layer of communication of it. How did you end up getting to Critical Path? Because I think this was like right before the .com crash as well, right? Was there a reason why you moved to the Bay Area? Was it because of all the hype during that time, or
My girlfriend at the time was friends with the director of IT there, so that's kind of how that worked out. And we were gone like 2 weeks after graduation. Drove down, and yeah, it was an exciting time to be in San Francisco, and worked there for 2 years. And my dad came down with an illness, so I moved home to watch over him. He recovered, and then I kind of looked around at the landscape in Hawaii, and now this is 2001, and I was and still am a huge fan of the Linux operating system. So I just started this Linux consulting business, and talking about Linux in Hawaii in 2001, that was a stretch. And about a year later, the few customers I had all kind of started talking about the same problem, which was spam and viruses in their email. And so I just sat down and pulled a few all-nighters and designed this system to deal with it. And that's kind of how Pal Spam came about. And I figured it should be a subscription system that renews. And because I was in Hawaii, I couldn't have on-premise solutions. I needed to have the solution on the internet, as a way to make this a viable business. So early cloud, early SaaS. Didn't really know the names for the terms at the time. I just did it because it made sense. So that's kind of how that came about.
Well, you'd be proud of me because I carry a Linux in addition to my Mac machine. I carry a Linux machine with me running, 20.4 LTS everywhere that I go out of principle. So it's I agree with you there. Although my hardcore friends would argue that BSD is the real open source project. We won't get into that for everyone on the line. So you moved us up. One of the questions really quickly before we get into Hawaii that I wanted to ask, because you were in SF and now you're back now. I mean, obviously it was an exciting time there. Were there differences kind of to the last few years and back then? I think the last decade was really kind of a golden decade for San Francisco. Just for maybe some of the people like myself that never had context before moving to the Bay Area in the last, 5 to 7 years. were there differences at that point? Similar feeling, similar optimism, or
Sure. Uh, so I think if we step back, the internet of the early 2000s, the first wave, if you compare it to a person, you could see it as a newborn infant, new to the world, not really sure what's going on. Fast forward to today, and the internet is a problem teenager, right? Getting bad grades, smoking cigarettes, taking the car out at night for joyrides. And so, will the internet grow up? Of course it will. So, San Francisco being the cranium of that, you can see how it's grown up. I mean, at the time, you had these news analysts on TV pumping up stocks like Netscape and whatever else. And these guys own shares in the same company. So, just to tell you the level of unsophistication at the time, of course, you can't do that anymore. You have to disclose your holdings. But, we saw stuff like Webvan that crashed and pet stock, well, not pets, but Webvan. So it seems to be more viable business models now. It seems to be an even greater gravitational attraction for talent. I know you've got Miami and Austin and all these other places popping up, but I think San Francisco is just a boom and bust town, and it's going to boom again. It's just not sure how fast, but there's something very attractive to the level of tech and intellectual stimulation being in San Francisco. And if you really want to live in the future, I mean, that's the place to be. I was in Hawaii for 5 months earlier this year, spent a couple weeks in SF before heading out here to Alaska. And I saw 5 autonomous cars in the first 24 hours being back. You won't see that in any other city, along with everything else. So anyhow, I think San Francisco is a pretty wonderful place. Not excited about the drugs or the feces or the needles or the crime or the evaporation of the middle class, but otherwise it's an exciting place.
yeah, yeah, no, makes sense. So going now, you went back to Hawaii to take care of family, which I love, and I think that at the end of the day is more important than any business will ever be in our lives. And you started the SaaS company not out of, out of kind of necessity, right? Because you couldn't get the server space, you couldn't get the rack space there. So how do we deliver this via the internet? Now, back then, I mean, there were like no companies and, no one was doing this in Hawaii. Was it like super lonely to start like the first SaaS company, or even, I mean, even tech wise, like back in the 2000s, I was in elementary, right? Like, I mean, it was like we were just getting the Macs, and you remember the old Macs, the where they had the blue and the orange colors and everything. Like that's how early you were.
Yeah, so at the time, LavaNet, local internet service provider, they had a solution for spam they were talking about. And then Peter Kay, kind of the radio voice guy, he was talking about a solution, but they were just talking. They hadn't launched. So I launched first, beat them to the punch. Their solutions never really panned out. So I learned being early to market, moving fast was definitely important. There was an Act 221 tax credit at the time, which had a unpopular demise, sudden and swift. I never participated in that credit program, but it did drive interest and investment in Hawaii at the time. But if you want to talk about software as a service, that was not present. You want to talk about cloud, that largely was not present other than web hosting companies. But yeah, it just made sense to do those things at the time. And I think we're doing certain things in Paubox now that to me makes sense, but they really don't have names for them yet. So I'm hoping we can be a part of naming these things we're doing in Paubox that I don't really see anywhere else.
So transitioning to Paubox, how did Paubox come about? Because like if you go to the Pau Spam website, it will redirect to Paubox. I think it literally
Yep.
I went last night to just double check and go back. I have to do my diligence on these things to get good questions. How did that kind of come about? Because that's really, I think, the seed of where the story and who you are today kind of starts. So you were doing Pow Spam, and then you transition into Paubox, right?
Yeah. So looking back, I probably should have moved back to San Francisco within the first few years of seeing success with Pal Spam. But I had this hypothesis that you could build a tech company in Hawaii of significant scale and size. So I probably stayed around longer than I should have, but I think everything turns out you know, everything turns out eventually. So I went to lunch with one of our customers, the CEO of Make-A-Wish Hawaii Foundation, and she had a business problem. It involved healthcare records, HIPAA, and so I decided we could probably do a solution for them, and that it warranted a separate company because it was a different type of solution. And that's pretty much how Paubox came about, just talking to customers. And that's very much the DNA of Paubox today, is using customer feedback as our roadmap of not only what to build, but when to build it.
Yep.
And then when we started getting leads for Paubox, just as an overview, we took this regulation HIPAA and this cumbersome method of delivering secure email for healthcare, HIPAA compliant email, which involves portals and steps and friction that no one really likes. So we designed a way to make it seamless and totally remove all the friction while maintaining the compliance aspect. And that's really our differentiator with Paubox. So we get these prospects on the phone, and I do a demo with them. They get the email in their inbox, no portal, straight to their inbox, and they just go, how can this be better than Microsoft and Google? And you're in Hawaii. I think you surf all day. I think this is a gimmick. Click. And then, this is 2014, 2015. So pretty obvious at that point. It was time to go back to San Francisco, a place whose brand is tech, right? I don't care what city you're in. San Francisco is known for tech. So that was our driving force to get back to San Francisco. And several people in Hawaii I knew all mentioned, well, maybe 3 people said, you got to go hunt down Daryl Higashi at the Hawaii Chamber of Commerce of Northern California. And so when I finally met Daryl, I think on the same day I met you, Michael, at that mixer in San Jose, I had kind of checked off one of the homework I was assigned for moving to the Bay. So that's kind of how that went.
And so I think you give like a phenomenal explanation of Paubox, and for anyone that's ever done HIPAA compliant email, how it was, I know deeply how painful it is. You get in, you get the link, you click on the link, you have to click into a web portal, you click on another thing, and you're there, and you did just deliver it seamlessly into their inbox, right? Which is a state of where it's at today. And I know that you're working on some other stuff that we'll talk about in a second here. But you were in Hawaii at this point, and I think were you connected in with Shinoa and Blue Startups? Did you go through their program, or are you just tangentially connected to them?
I've known Shinoa for 20 plus years, but we did not go through Blue Startups. We went through 500 Startups instead. But yeah, if she asked me to present or whatever, I'll happily do it if I have the time. But yeah, I guess we're outside. We're on the periphery of being an advisor when asked for Blue Startups.
No, the reason that I bring that up is her and I have talked, and your name came up. Obviously, we're honoring her at as our Kului Ikanua Award winner this year. And then when you applied for 500, were you already in SF at this point? Like you had made the decision, you moved and you applied, or did you apply in Hawaii and then come over?
I got out as soon as possible. That was our 9th time applying to an accelerator by the time we got into 500 startups, 2016. So a
So
lot of no's.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, I mean that happens. And so maybe one of the key things that I want to pull out at this point is that decision, because you had brought up people, and I think it's a really bad misconception, maybe partially true, but in Hawaii we surf all day, we don't work hard, we're 3 hours behind California, 6 hours behind East Coast, depending on the time, so it's hard to do business there to a certain degree, I guess. But if you were doing it again, it sounds like you would move earlier. What about today, where everything's changed, right? To a certain degree, I think after COVID, things are more remote, right? Would you still do and just say, come to the Bay Area as soon as possible, or a tech hub, or, I can stay in Hawaii, be with family, and so forth?
Yeah, that's a good one, Michael. On the one hand, we've got a billionaire running Oracle, living on Lanai, owns 98 whatever percent of the island. We've got another billionaire CEO of Salesforce living on the Big Island. So you have the extreme end of tech executives now living in Hawaii because of the pandemic. Um, but man, Hawaii just has a branding problem when it comes to business on the mainland. I mean, I just kind of came to the realization that I'm not going to fix that, and it's my job to grow the business as best as I can. And the best place to do that for the type of business we're in my opinion, was San Francisco. Now, if you're in tourism tech or renewable energy, Hawaii might be the place for you to grow and continue your business. But we just don't see a lot of empirical data about startups in Hawaii, staying in Hawaii, having success. Most times, if you look at the unicorn company out of Blue Startups, Volta, right? They go through the program and then shortly thereafter move to the mainland to grow the business. So I don't think companies should be punished for doing that. I think it makes business sense. And for us, a lot of it was the time zone difference. Um, if you want to field that sales call at 9 a.m. Eastern, well, then you're up and functioning at 3 a.m. Sunday, every Sunday. That I've done it. It's not easy.
Yeah.
You can do it for 4 weeks, but after a quarter, it's gonna kick your butt. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Hawaii's tough. I was thinking a lot about what we as HCCNC members can do to help Hawaii from afar improve, and it's a really tough question. And the branding issue is a big part of it, I'd say, and the time zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something that I think extensively about because I want to raise my kids in Hawaii and I want to do business and there, right, long term. And I think, it's gonna take. This is why, partially, why I'm rooting for you so hard, from the sidelines. It's gonna take someone like you making it. Maybe you don't make the first pass in Hawaii, but coming back and then actually feeding in and being that example of success. And I think the angel networks and the early funding are getting built up, but it will. I think it'll depend on the type of product, like you mentioned, right? That's a big thing. It will depend on not being as beholden to time zones and so forth. So you hit on I think a lot of really really good points there. Do you shifting more to Paubox now and where you folks are at. One of the questions that I always love to ask founders and leaders and entrepreneurs, and I think will really resonate within the broader theme of this series that we're building out, is like, you're leading Paubox. You just raised the Series A. Congratulations on that. And you know, how do you, I know this is a generic question, but how are you staying focused? How are you gauging success, especially during these times where the world is kind of a little bit all hemorrhaging all over the place? Um, how like are you staying just focused on the future and the vision of the company, given how crazy everything seems. Like the world seems upside down, and I can go into like 20 examples of why.
Yeah, for sure. So since we're a SaaS business, we're a subscription software business. To me, it's pretty straightforward what the goal is, and that's revenue. So, we're looking to end this year at a number, and we're striving towards the number. And then the ultimate North Star is 100 million in annual recurring revenue. That's been a goal of mine for a long time. In fact, when I'd say that to people in Hawaii before I moved, the eyes would roll in the room. And yet, when you say it in, the Bay Area, it's like, you sure you don't want to add another zero? I think you
Yeah.
might be thinking too small. So that to me is another big difference. Um, anyhow, so as we've become more of a distributed team, we've just been forced to use, things we can collaborate on the internet, basically, and we've settled on the OKR, you know, goal attainment framework, which was popularized by Google, stands for objectives and key results. So that seems to be working out pretty well for us. And like I said, being a SaaS business, the North Star is pretty black and white. You just put a number on it and go for it. So that's what we've been doing.
And out of curiosity, what do you use for your OKRs? Do you use just spreadsheets, or we use Lattice, which I'm a big fan of. I don't know if you have any tips or tricks for people out there that are looking to learn more and maybe use the tool or something.
I just read a book, Measure What Matters, and then we just use Google Sheets, like tabs. Very simple. I think we'll pay for software before the year is out, but right now we're just using tabs in Google Sheets. Very, very basic.
No,
Yeah.
the basic works the best sometimes. And one other, and I think you maybe kind of answered this question, but I want to ask it again because I'm always curious to hear people's thoughts of on this path of this journey. Like, how do you think about um, not just the company's end game, but the your personal end game as well, right? Like, so you're gonna build out $100 million ARR company. By the way, I have zero doubt when you tell me that. Like, that's a given for me. I know that's gonna happen. But like, is it like get there and then move back to Hawaii, or is it, stay in the Bay Area long term, or, buy the biggest kayak that man could buy?
Sure. I when I think about California, I think of opportunity, and I think of there's still a lot for me to learn there, specifically San Francisco. So by no means, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done still. Um, but yeah, I mean, we're so spoiled growing up in Hawaii, and we fully realize it later in life when we meet other people and live in other places. So to be able to have kids that grew up in Hawaii and born in Hawaii, that would be wonderful. But right now, just kind of focus on the business, and I'll figure that out when the time comes.
In the
Yeah.
time. Got you. Makes total sense. Any other just like general takeaways, and maybe like for other people, and I'm kind of talking for myself here, but I know for everyone on the line, we have, a mix of people from people that work in the software industry to other entrepreneurs like yourself and so forth. When you think about, business leadership and so forth, um, and that's a really big topic, obviously, but if you had to kind of distill what's made you successful to this point, what do you think kind of those key traits are? You mentioned the focus, but are there other things that you would be giving advice to other founders or other people that want to follow in your kind of footsteps and success?
Sure. Well, it still very much feels like a work in progress, but the things I've seen that work in my business so far, yeah, number one, you got to launch. This is software. If you don't launch, you're nothing.
Yeah.
You got to launch. Pow Spam, I pulled all-nighters and I launched. Paubox, I pulled an all-nighter and we launched. Not the healthiest thing to do, but it just got to the point where I couldn't sleep anymore. It not being in existence. And so it's just, F this all-nighter. I'm not stopping until it's done. Um, Customer feedback, I think, is very important in our business. So staying attuned to the customers, simple concepts, difficult to do over time. And then the goal stuff is pretty important as we hire more people, and we only have 40, right? But it's 25 more than we had 15 months ago, right? So I think the writing stuff down and communicating that to staff is pretty important. But a bunch of books will tell you that stuff. So yeah, I think for the software business, you got to launch, man. I mean, I just cannot stress enough. Just launch with the bare basic stuff.
No,
Yeah.
this is phenomenal advice. And 40 people, by the way, is a great sized company. Like, for what it's worth. I know that you're hard on yourself, but 40 is like, it's a lot of people, and it's I think again you're hitting some really big milestones already there. Um, a couple more things before we kind of wrap out, and this as far has been great. This is so cool because we've talked so many times, but I don't think that like I've ever heard like the backstory as much. We more talk business and so forth. So um you give a ton back to the community, and that's through your own Paubox scholarship, through the HCCNC and your support, and indirectly through our scholarship. You even, I believe, not even that I believe, is that Nick Wong now is working with you folks, and he came through the HCCNC program. So you're very deep there. Maybe could you give us just a little bit of a high level on the motivation for that? I think you hinted at it earlier. All the things that you're doing in that regard.
Yeah. So one of the takeaways I had being in business in Hawaii, um, the leader always gives back. This is very clear when you kind of reflect on what business leaders in Hawaii do. So I very much wanted to do that also, moving up to San Francisco. And because we saw a vacuum of leadership in this niche within a niche, HIPAA compliant email. And so if there's a vacuum, a leader will fill it, right? So I tell the company over and over again, we're going to display the traits of a leader. And over time, we, of course, will be seen as a leader. And so bringing that value from Hawaii forward has been very important to us. When we hit 100 customers in San Francisco at our office, across the street from a BART stop at Mission and 16, we gave away 100 pairs of socks and 100 span musubi, just to show our gratitude for the city that gave us this opportunity. So that was fun. And then we did it at 500 customers and 1,000 customers. And at the point where we did 1,000 span musubi, even at the generous price we got from Bert at Grinds, it was still like serious money, bro. So I thought, man, what's a better leverage of $3,000 or $4,000? And then this kind of comes back to that scholarship I got in college that no longer exists for Native Hawaiians. And so it was obvious to me what we had to do next. So we created the Kaihina Scholarship, Paubox Kaihina Scholarship, named in honor of my tutu. And Nick Wong was our first recipient. I met him through mutual friends back home. And he also was a scholarship recipient of the HCCNC. And so my hypothesis around the Kaihina Scholarship was, software engineering is an honorable profession. And it's one of the things missing in Hawaii right now, in my opinion. For example, when's the last time you read a story about two roommates, creating an app or company out of their dorm at UH or HPU or any college in Hawaii? The number of software engineers coming out of Hawaii is very low right now. And you can just do a simple search of Google, you'll find that there are no stories about that. And so the Kaihina scholarship was originally targeting Native Hawaiians who want careers in software engineering. And we did that for 2 years. And then coming into this year, we also designed it to be recurring in nature because I think a recurring scholarship has a lot of value in it. You can depend on that revenue coming in, just like our business. We're a recurring revenue business. So I thought it was a nice tie-in. And then fast forward to this year, and we saw a drop off of applicants.
We
Travin Watase, who's on this Zoom, is the customer friend, and we're each other's customers for his startup Scholars app. And so I know by having our scholarship on Scholars app, we're going to get the eyeballs looking at this scholarship, but we just didn't see enough volume coming through. And so I really had to step back from this. And what really cinched it for me was a lunch I had with Elliot Mills, who's a Kamehameha Schools trustee, general manager at the Disney Aulani Resort. So we had lunch a few months ago in Honolulu. And I'm hyping the Kahikina scholarship. And then he just said, yeah, you're right. Kamehameha Schools does not have a STEM scholarship for Hawaiians. It doesn't exist. And then it snapped into focus that we can and should be that solution for Native Hawaiians. So we expanded the criteria this year to any Native Hawaiian pursuing a STEM career. And we're in the final stages of selecting recipients for this year's award. And I think that's what we should be doing at this point. And I'm reading a book now, The Code Breaker. It's by the same guy who wrote the definitive biography on Steve Jobs. It's about Jennifer Doudna, who's from Big Island, Hilo girl. She was the co-inventor of the CRISPR gene editing system. So we've got some really exciting things going on in STEM right now. I mean, inheritable, gene selection, very controversial. STEM, obviously. We've got the James Webb Telescope about to be launched any day now, supposedly. So anyhow, to provide Native Hawaiians with some type of assistance in that pursuit, I think is worth doing. And really what we found these last 2 years with the Kaikina now STEM scholarship is we have not a large amount of money. It's $1,000 a year per student per year. But the upside is we do a Venmo. So the money goes to their account, not the school. They can spend it however they see fit. They're adults. And number two, I'm striving to build a network for these students because I think that's the value we can give them that exceeds any other scholarship out there for Native Hawaiians. So, do you need help finding that internship or getting a job placement? We give a shit. So we're going to do it, right? So I built out a computer science software engineer network for these recipients. There's only 4 of them. So, but they'll continue to grow. And now my next task, I will need to build out a STEM network for our recipients and really provide them that leverage for their career path and trajectory. And I've noticed too, this informal advisor network of Hawaiian software engineers, they like it too because these are their future people they get to hire, right? So it kind of works both ways. So very interesting to see where it will go. And I just feel there's an obligation to do this, especially since the thing that gave me so much benefit no longer exists. So of course I should be doing something about it.
Yeah. Well, A, that's a phenomenal story, and I love how that kind of all pieced together. B is I'm gonna have to hit you up and trade ideas with you both on how we set ours up, whether it's recurring or so forth. I think we have both Travin and also David Lee on the line, and also how we better build like the network and everything. Also, because I think that's a something that we've been looking at, and so we'll have to trade notes there as well. But I really I went to school on a full ride. I got very, very lucky that I did. And if it wasn't for that, the full academic ride, like, I probably wouldn't have went to college. So it's great to see that. So thank you. The final thing before we wrap up and maybe take a few questions is going to be um, running a business, and leading teams is extremely stressful. Like 40 people is a lot of people, right? You're dealing with 39 other problems plus your, the day to day in your own life. I know you're an avid fisherman. Specifically, you do, kayak fishing. I know you hold some records and so forth. Um, can you talk a little bit more about, like, how that came about, what you do for fun, and tricks and tips to stay sane and kind of blow off and keeping the hobbies through the day to day craziness of life and running a business?
Sure. Well, I mean, none of this is, I don't know, totally insightful, but, I read the book, Why We Sleep, basically sleep 8 hours. So now I'm trying to do that. You sleep less than 8, you're going to live less. All right. Doing my best to get 8 hours of sleep now. I have a journal that helps reduce stress, put my thoughts down. Try my best to exercise. This business will take years to build. And then to me, although I don't do it as often as I can, I do try my best to sit, meditate, whatever you want to call it. That's provided some interesting insight for me. I tell you this story. I was kayak fishing out at tracks on the west side of Oahu before I moved to the bay. And it was right when the sun's coming up, and I got my fish finder and I'm trying to catch opelu, right? Bait to use as live bait. And then the water starts talking to me. And I guess when you want to talk to me, talk in pigeon, that's the best way to get to me. So the fish are going, hey, no worries, we're going to be here when you get back. Because at the time, uprooting and moving back to San Francisco was going to be a pretty difficult thing, especially maintaining a business at the same time. So I especially knew that moving to back to San Francisco was the right call. So to me, kayak fishing, unplug, get back in touch with stuff, and things tend to talk. I don't know how to explain it. Kind of runs in the family.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So we have a couple questions coming up from the crowd. I'm just gonna call on people, and if you want to read yours out, go for it. Darlene, you had one on encouraging more interest in STEM. I don't know if could you ask that maybe? I think you gotta unmute. Sorry.
Oh, yes. My question was, how do we encourage more interest in STEM and other professional careers? Because many young people, are really questioning careers in business in general, and they want to see, they're wondering, can I do business and can I have purpose at the same time? Do I have to give them up? So what do you think about that?
Great question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so, the world's different now as it was when I was in high school. That's just obvious. So part of our requirements for the Kaihina STEM scholarship, because it's a recurring scholarship, the only two requirements we have: number one, you're still in school. Number two, you issue a blog post or some kind of video talking about your college experience as it is this year, and talking about the Paubox Kaihina STEM scholarship. So we're turning our recipients into the marketing engine for our scholarship. One, because I don't have the time to do it. Two, because that's how the world is, right? It's social media. So I'm hoping over time and at scale, our own scholarship recipients will be the marketing engine to get into this. And then, as I've observed when I do these career fair, speak at high schools and stuff, a lot of kids today are money driven, right? So, and that's fair. I mean, that's how you put food on the table. So at some point, I think you do have to promote yourself, some kind of material. You have to provide numbers around what the average pay is for a software engineer, et cetera. And that was one of the driving forces behind this hypothesis around software engineering being an honorable profession. Number one, it's insatiable demand. Number two, it's speed to market. And number three, it's this potential at wealth generation. So if you look at the top 10 companies in the world by market cap, 7 of the 10 have founders who have computer science backgrounds. So just getting that word out, I think will be encouraging. But what we also saw at the same time was not a lot of public school Hawaiians even know what computer science is. They're not even exposed to it at the high school level. So that one, I don't know what to do with that one. I don't know if it's my place to insert computer science professors at every, public high school in Hawaii. But I know from the data we saw that most of our applicants were coming from private schools. They were exposed to it. So I think it's just, you want to see people that look like you having success. So I think at some level, I will need to promote Paubox, our recipients, and myself more to expose them to it, because there's a big world out there beyond, Oahu or Waianae Valley or Nanakuli or Waimanalo, etc.
Well, yeah, the same problem exists on the mainland in any low to moderate income community. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
Awesome. Great question, Darlene. Kyle, I think you had a question.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you. So I mean, this is kind of more of an observation, but Hoala, because since you've been in the mix and been in Hawaii and talking to people, and one thing is that I've volunteered services or to help students in the Hawaii network, but unless they want it or unless they see some kind of connection to the mainland or this bigger network, they don't really pursue it, or they don't really ask for it or want it. And I don't know if it's just initially they're not exposed to it, how interconnected everything is, but just wondering, what your thoughts on, is it our place? How do we get more exposure to people so that a group like Hawaii Chamber of Commerce, Northern California, is relevant in promoting and making the Hawaii workforce and students better and more competitive?
Oh yeah, that's tough. I mean, if you've never lived outside of Hawaii, I noticed my friends who've never lived outside of Hawaii, man, that's a tough ask there. You just kind of get in your own world. Kyle, I don't know the answer for that one, other than doing our best to do business with companies that provide accelerator like startup services, like the Hawaii Chamber does with Blue Startups, Mana Up, and the Elemental Accelerator. I think that's a tangible takeaway we can do to send these folks more business, and in turn, the people that work in those businesses are exposed to the success of those businesses. Hopefully we'll see a tie in there, but man, that's a tricky one. I don't know.
Any other questions from the crowd? I have one or two to wrap up, and then we will wrap up here. Let's call. Okay, so if no one's gonna ask anything, I had two for you. One, Hoala, is I know that you have some great book recommendations, and Kyle brought this up earlier. But if you had to give kind of the 3 business books that you would recommend people to read, what would those be?
Oh, it's probably going to be stuff I read recently because that's top of mind. But I guess in my business, Crossing the Chasm was important, still is. Only the Paranoid Survive, And then, shucks, man, that Why We Sleep book. I mean, gosh, I sent that book to Trevin a couple days ago,
Yeah.
hoping he reads it. I mean, damn, that thing will save your life, or at least extend it. My gosh,
It's a
8
great,
hours of sleep. Who would have thought?
yeah,
My goodness.
Matt Walker I think Matt Walker is his name, did a great, I read it a few years
Yeah.
back, and it totally changed my life. I'm still not perfect, but the mental clarity that you have when you wake up for the early morning meeting and so forth is like on a another level there. So
Yeah.
the other question that I just wanted to ask, Kyle, it's why we sleep. Yeah. Oh, perfect. You got him. Um, the two, I guess, two other questions, and we'll do this quick drawing, is gonna be, um, one is gonna be, I always like asking people, what are you most excited about for the future? I feel like the last year and a half has been kind of, a drag on people, and there's, a lot going on within the world. Um, maybe outside of Paubox, like what gets you very excited about just an optimistic for the future?
Hmm. Uh, Gee, I'm so focused on Paubox these days. That's a good one. Well, I mean, shoot, selfishly, starting a family with my wife, and one day breaking the world record for largest fish caught from a kayak unassisted. I don't know.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
I think it's an artificially low record, not artificially, but I think it can be broken. World record's at 224 pounds. And I think kayak fishing can be done better, or not better, but I think a bigger fish is out there off a kayak.
Perfect. So this is actually very funny because this comes into what our prize drawing is going to be based off of. So say no more. Um, the one final question before I ask the question to the audience is going to be, if you were to kind of, within the group that we have online, and to everyone that's going to watch this after, where do people go to find you? What type of people should they refer and so forth to you and say, hey, check out Paubox?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's Pau as in, done. So paubox.com. And our ideal customer is an organization dealing with HIPAA compliance regulation hurdles. Really, that's our ideal customer right now. And we're striving to be the market leader for HIPAA compliant email. And I think with time and focus, we can and will achieve that. And I think it's a undervalued market that's been, whose relevance has increased since the pandemic.
So is that mostly healthcare, or are there other industries, like if we know someone that, has a different business and so forth, that they should like look into you?
Yeah, it's mostly healthcare, nonprofits. But at the enterprise level, we see customers coming in where it's an HR department within a large organization, and they've got HIPAA compliance hurdles. So, they want to have 20 seats within the 2,000 employee or 50,000 employee company. So, yeah, it's a pretty large market out there. And the dirty secret in healthcare is the fax machine is still the backbone of communication, even in 2021. I mean, it's just wild, man. It's just wild. So
I went in to get a Quest test the other day, and they couldn't get the email PDF record, and so they had to ask my doctor to scan it. Pretty crazy. So for everyone on the line or watching, if you know anyone in healthcare, if you know anyone in nonprofit or that deals with this type of stuff, please refer them over. That support Paubox, that support Hoala and everything that they do, and be